Good morning and welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Good morning, everyone. I think you are in for a treat today. Literally seconds before the podcast, we started arguing about things. I think we're gonna have some fired up conversation today.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm happy to be here.
We are officially live again. This is not a pre-recorded episode. Sorry for those 3 recorded. People were traveling and moving and being busy, so
unless you only listen to the audio, then everything's exactly the same.
True. Then not sorry.
Greggy is testing us to make sure that we're live in the chat.
Yep.
And he has
we are expected to say kumquat as it is noted in the chat. So there you go, Greg. That is the live trigger. The secret word of the day is kumquat. Excellent. Awesome. Good morning, everyone. Lots of stuff has been changing. We got a November update very late in November this year. I think they were kind of holding back because of Thanksgiving holiday and taking a little extra time there for the team, which is good. I hope the Microsoft team got a little bit of a break. But there's a ton of new stuff. I don't know if everyone has seen. Have you guys played with the new desktop? Did you see it all come in and download the new version and start playing around with it a little bit?
Man, this is a pretty major update.
It is a big one. There's a lot in it. I've read through it. I haven't gotten a chance to play with the features yet, though.
I have downloaded, and the green is now throwing me off. And I saw a Twitter chat this morning. People were rolling over, going, "Oh, now I need to update all of my documentation again because they've changed a fundamental feature." This is why I don't.
The default.
Yeah.
You're talking about the default color. So they changed the new color accent.
I like it.
Right.
It feels a lot more like Excel to me, honestly, with that green.
Yeah, it's like SharePoint. The Power BI for SharePoint was green.
That's true. BI. What was it? What was that called, Seth? It was back when they first BI, something like that. It was just when it was Power BI inside SharePoint.
No, it was Power BI. It was just in SharePoint.
Oh, I thought it had a different name back then.
Oh, I don't think so.
Anyways, so lots of cool things. Anything that stuck out to you guys on new options or features coming from the blog?
Our review is in Excel, Dan.
I like the
features blog. Dynamic. What the extension of dynamic slicers using field parameters, right? That's a good improvement to combine those features together. It seems like a little bit of an interesting way to get it working from a just copy the visual and change it kind of thing. But
yes,
hey, if it works, it works.
Yeah, I'm going to be interested. I haven't played with that one yet. I want to see some more use cases. I'm already seeing some people do some explanations on how that works. So I'm kind of holding my breath here a bit on this one. I'm not sure if I 100% see the use case yet. Maybe I'm thinking my first use case for this one would be maybe around you wanted to select different time periods or something like that, or based on a time period selection, it adjusts what you see in other slicers to select things on the page. I think that'll be.
Yeah, I agree. I haven't locked down like all the scenarios, but
no,
in my mind, immediately it's another level of hierarchy of like how you can slice things potentially or give a navigation experience on a page. So it's definitely something I took a note to show the team and have them dive into.
It's just another one of those ways that Power BI is removing the way to do that. You had to hack it. It's just making it so much easier. And I don't want to say it's going to be more used than just field parameters in general, but I think this is a lot easier from a user experience. And I think just a easier thing to implement than field parameters in general, like from a consumer point of view.
I would agree.
So this is actually, in a sense, maybe bigger impact than just putting a field parameter in a visual.
I think so. I think it could potentially have that more. Again, it's what I feel like they're building right now is these are the edge case or not edge case. These are additional features that are kind of like, we should have had these. And now they're kind of like rounding out a little bit more on some of these ideas and enriching them a bit more, which I really like. Alpert was on Twitter. Alpert is one of the developers from the visualization team. He was very thrilled about the synchronizing and unsynchronizing small multiples axis. I think that's a pretty big win here. The small multiples when it came out was a neat idea. It's definitely needed, but it was very limiting as far as what you could and could not do with it. And I think they've added a lot of extra features to it now, where you can synchronize the y-axes, so you can desynchronize them to look for trends across different areas. I think that was a big win. Probably was just needed a little bit more time to mature and enhance the visual, but I really like this visual now and feel like it's covering a lot more use cases.
I think for me, one of the biggest ones is, just like you said, modeling in the cloud, composite models are going to be more of a thing. They've removed another limitation with the ability to work with multiple data sources using composite models. So basically, if you didn't know, if you wanted to filter one or more tables in a remote source group, it was not possible. If you had an import in a live connection or a direct query, you could filter one table, but not multiple. But now that's limitations removed. So that they're just getting closer and closer to this really being standard practice.
Like what Greg says here in the chat window. Greg was commenting here. It's annoying to see a per visual integration, like with field parameters, because some visuals work with it, some visuals don't. But it kind of reinforces the limits of adding a feature at the visual layer rather than the model layer. Because the model layer, as soon as you build something in the model layer, it's available to all visuals kind of universally and instantly. As soon as you start putting something at the visualization layer, each visual needs to be updated to absorb that feature set so that it can work. Yeah. So I think it's a really good call out there of kind of like the strategic position of like, okay, we're building custom things for visuals, we're building custom things for models. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the alternative there is calculation groups, right?
Yes. Which also has its own set of limitations as well. As we heard from Marco and Alberto, it's kind of a limited feature set by itself.
Yeah, but I like I agree with it, but at the same time, if we're going to talk about like areas of improvement that Power BI could be better at, like having more micro control in these visual areas has always been a complaint, right? Like you're not allowing me to like make this work the way I need to for this specific report, and I think these features kind of address that a bit. In allowing us more control over those visuals when and where we need them, as opposed to the overarching, like it works in the model. We build these things and they're universal across everything, which makes a lot of sense for reusability and all of the things that make Power BI powerful. But at the same time, like you need that grain of control as well. But it's a good point to call out that it's yet another part of training. Right? Like talking people.
One more thing to add in there, right? How to integrate with
it,
how to work with it, how to build it
for you consultants.
Yes, exactly. Right.
That's what we're here for. I think one of the biggest one is the Dax functions. I know this was talked about before, but now it's official. I think someone found it, but there was no intelligence. Is the evaluate and log, and then the 2 CSV, 2 JSON Dax functions, which are purely meant from an auditing debugging point of view. So,
I'm not sure that's the biggest feature. I think it's a very fundamental change inside what Dax can do, but I don't think there's going to be a lot of people that are going to just generally use this. I think this is very niche for now.
What would you say the niche cases are then?
Well, if you're hitting a model directly to go get data out of it, 2 JSON might be an actual really relevant call out so that it comes back to you in a format that an application can use. I think debugging might use this as well to some degree, but I don't think you're going to build. I mean, 90% of people who are building reports today are not doing a ton of debugging. So I don't think it's going to be
an
used.
Expert level feature. Right?
I agree.
Like it's definitely when you're in the weeds and trying to troubleshoot something.
Yeah. All right. So maybe the bigger, what everyone's talking about, or what I've seen a lot, is that optimize ribbon. They added another ribbon.
I'm curious what you guys think about this one, actually. So what do you guys think about it? I would be reading up on it and maybe playing with it with a bit here.
I think it could be very useful in the beginning stages of like creating a large report and building a lot of measures, and but I don't know. I'm on the fence. So essentially, it's like you can control whether or not the visuals themselves go execute the DAX that you're creating. Right?
Correct. Yes.
And then the intriguing part for me was the customization of certain like scenario setups that you could do. I want to dig into that and see what it means, but essentially it's just don't go hammering databases. And maybe this is something that is much more applicable in composite model scenarios where something's going to auto execute. But I don't have a ton of those use cases at the moment.
And I haven't tested it too much yet, but I think this with the pausing visuals, I think does it work a little kind of like Tableau Editor when you're creating DAX where it doesn't actually write in a sense to the model yet? Like because that's what makes Tableau Editor so quick or so fast is until you save it, that's when it actually goes to the model. I don't know if it's actually getting evaluated after you create a measure when you pause the visuals.
I got to play with it a bit more.
Yeah.
I think it's similar in nature to what you're discussing. I mean, it's not, typically when you click on anything on the report page, a bar in the bar chart or make a new visual, it's immediately grabbing data or running queries inside the model to go get the information back to you.
Yeah.
I feel like this is a similar feature to what I would see in Excel, where I would do the auto calculate on an Excel sheet. But when I equate this to what I already know in Excel, the reason I would turn this on in Excel is my Excel sheet has a lot of calculations in it. And every time I'm touching a new cell or making something or making a change, the sheet would just chew and chew and chew and chew. So not wrong, but typically it's usually an indicator of an overly bloated Excel sheet, or there's not enough optimization in the Excel sheet that's causing this to have this problem. So I relate this to a similar so that's what I know about Excel. I'm relating this to the similar feature, right? This is the same thing as turning on auto calculate or turning off auto calculate inside Power BI, which again, why are you doing that? Is it because you're using direct query? Is it because you're just testing things? I mean, okay, fine for development mode, but is this going to turn into one of those, your poor design of your report or your poor design of your DAX measures are now causing you to pause things because it gives you a better developer experience? Or is it eventually going to trickle into like the actual report where you have to start? I don't know. This is where I'm like, if you built your stuff correctly, you probably wouldn't have this issue, is what I'm thinking.
I mean, there's use cases. You might have a lot of visuals on the canvas.
Well, again, that would be point. This is my point. This is my point exactly.
You're right, Mike. Every report should only have 3 visuals on a page. Right.
I mean, if you have so many visuals that you need to start pausing them to do something, okay, I'm thinking probably not the best design. That's where I'm going. I'm like, you probably need to streamline something. You just built an analyst level report and you need to start paring it down and figuring out, okay, what are the 4 or 5? And like, okay, I can get away with like 10 visuals on a page, right? There's a couple KPIs, you have some charts across the bottom, you're looking at 4 to 5 insights per page, right? Okay, fine. But getting up to like hundreds of visuals per page, or like, I don't know what you'd have, a lot of objects, you're not using backgrounds or scrims or whatever, you're just adding bloat to having it render stuff. So yeah, you're going to want to turn that stuff off. You want to stop it. So I think to me, it's an indication of like, maybe you need to redesign a little bit here. But
your visuals have a spinny icon at any time. Rejected.
Rejected.
Yeah.
Poor user experience.
What else?
Metrics. Another metric update, man. So
yeah, dude, they're going all in on that,
yeah.
man. I like this one. Go ahead.
So I'll let you run with that. I've said a few, so especially if you like it too.
Sharing metrics, right? Like making them much more consumable across the organization. So if you create a set, now they're like, we were talking about this, like, great, I create a metrics. Now you have to create your metric. Now everybody like now this eliminates that. You're creating a universal set of metrics that everybody can start to use in their scorecards. And I that's a great feature add, like to get more adoption of where and how you would use those across an organization. People still need to know that they can grab them there, but at the same time, it's much easier than how else would you do it, right? So at least there's a way to share and use.
Well, I think this really opens up to having, just like we've talked about gold data set, thin reports, having foundational scorecards, right? Because now you can create these base, in a sense, metrics that are for the company. So for any other team, department, however using, can link to the source metric. So they don't have to be recreated, and the comments, the check-ins, they all get synced. So this actually creates a lot of scenarios, I think, and a lot more use cases. So no, I agree.
So you skipped over the one that has me most concerned.
Uh,
and it's been a while since we talked about it, and I forget the specific use case that like failed horribly for me. But the new way to upload Power BI or Excel files into a workspace.
Mm-hmm.
So you can do this now just via a dialog in the service that allows you to go look at your OneDrive or SharePoint. And if it's in SharePoint, right, or either of these, it automatically turns on that like sync feature, which you had to like really before you had to be very explicit in setting this up so that you can essentially have a Power BI file in your SharePoint folder. And when you make changes to the file and save it, they would automatically sync after an hour or so with the Power BI service. That one, I don't know if I like, because I tried this in the past and I forget what the case was where either that link broke or when I made the change, like the GUIDs of the report changed or something, and it just hosed something downstream. And I was like, nope, I want to control when and how this report gets changed, because especially in embedded scenarios, I can't have GUIDs changing.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's gonna be a reference or a call to a page, especially if the application is owning the tabs and stuff like that, that there was just too much volatility in there. And if this is going to auto apply that, I don't know if that's going to confuse the crap out of users, because they're not going to read the documentation, right? So I don't know if those are still valid, but I'll have to definitely test it out again. But like that's a significant difference, like not calling that out, or like in other scenarios where you're like, oh, okay, go grab a file. That's all you're doing. But this scenario is saying, go grab the file, and now I'm going to sync this behind the scenes. So what happens when they try to publish the report again or something? It's not going to override. Like, because I think there's this disconnect between once you hook that up, you can't do a publish, can you?
Nope.
Yeah. So
it
like
syncs. Yeah.
Anyway,
I'm not a fan of that.
It's the one that makes me kind of like think, wow, that's going to result in a lot of support cases.
Yeah,
but we'll see.
Potentially, we'll see how it goes.
Maybe they fix some stuff. But
there's a few reports that I always would forget that it was synced with SharePoint. Like on my personal, every time I tried to publish, it was like, oh no, this is part of OneDrive. So I basically removed it from the service just to publish it again, because that's I mean, there are use cases, especially I think when we talk more on that consumer view. I don't know. Maybe there's something from a publishing point of view where they can't publish, but But actually, that does open up a whole other thing where you could have someone who has no access to the workspace, but has access to SharePoint, right?
We shall see.
Oh boy, I didn't even think about that.
And I'll be kind of honest here. I've kind of walked. Initially, when this came out, there was really no version controlling on anything Power BI related, anyways. So I was really liking this idea because SharePoint could store all the information, and then really love the linking here. But Microsoft started blocking the ability to then re-upload something from not SharePoint or OneDrive. So as soon as you upload something from a get data folder, either OneDrive or locally, it blocks you. You can't publish from desktop anymore. It says no.
Yeah.
So to me, like, that's a good thing. On the other hand, it also creates some headache because you don't really know when that thing is refreshing. And in the article it says, or in the blog post, it's talking about it refreshes every hour. So it could take up to an hour for things to change. And usually when I'm developing things in service, I don't like that anymore.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it makes a lot of sense, maybe potentially from a dev standpoint, if I'm publishing into a non-prod standpoint.
Correct.
Or, but that's not always the case.
Yes.
Right? So
and I think more so
anyway,
now,
I think like I said, if the same issues that I've had where that link breaks or I've done something stupid and broke it myself or whatever, like repairing it was such a pain.
Correct.
So if that's still there, I just foresee some volume of support cases in that area.
I feel like inside the Power BI service, there should be, like, if you do something like that, there should be an immediately link back to where that file is, or there should be the ability to relink that file to whatever it was inside OneDrive. So if I had the ability to like rebind it when I needed to, because you're right, sometimes that link does get broken, and Adam's confirming right now on the chat, sometimes people have broken that link between OneDrive and the Power BI.com area. And then what? Like, you have no way of you have to basically delete and restart, and that just bonks everything. It makes it not cool. Anyways.
But anyway, lot of good features.
A lot of good features.
I mean, there was a lot to talk about this month.
Yeah, I think so.
Without, I think it does deserve to be said, but we talked, I think there was a Twitter chat about the paginated reports, and we talked about it before. Another major update to the formatted tables, where like basically we're going to create a quick table. They're making this really look like paginated reports, just the ability to quickly create a table. Like, now that they're adding formatting options, they're getting really close to, I think, removing paginated reports in general, or getting very close to just having all the majority of the features needed all in that table formatting of the
Yep.
So
I think it would work 100% if you just got rid of, if you added the ability to filter that table, because right now you can't filter those tables. As soon as they add in the service the ability to add a filter for that table on some data that's inside a column, I think you're done. I think you've built it, basically. I mean, there's definitely some more prettying things up there for paginated reports. So
spoken like guys who don't know how many options
paginated reports.
I know.
True statement. True statement.
When I start sending my invoices in paginated reports, okay. So until then, for the data dump. So
I mean,
I know
sound off, chat. All you SSRS folks like me, come on, man. You got the history.
I love it. That's good. All right.
Yes, you're scratching the surface. Anyway.
We are I guess 20 minutes deep plus in the topic, and we just got through the introduction. So let's get into our real topic for the day. I guess we should jump in there. So today's topic is really around security groups for Power BI, and talking through what kind of security groups should there be, what groups are you using. This, I think, is actually an underrated use case, or this is what I would call a best practice that I use, particularly with clients and setting up things for them for Power BI. And we'll see kind of where we go from here. This is actually coming from some background on the topic. Tom, you want to give us some background on the topic? I think we've talked about something similar to this one around app audiences, kind of a separate but related topic. I think it's around episode 158.
Yeah, so on 158, we talked about the new app audiences, and we got a lot of resources from Kurt Bueller, Data Goblins, and basically like the different use cases of it. And at the very end, he talks about using security groups, not necessarily as a, like, from security, when you normally think about like preventing someone to see something, but using it as a really more of a feature set. So the article link will be in the podcast description, will be in the YouTube chat. But that got us thinking, like, man, there are so many different implementations of groups in the Power BI service, from security groups, Office 365 groups.
Yes.
And we were considering doing a 3-part series on groups, and then we realized that would be way too much.
Way too many groups.
We'd probably lose the audience, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like, let's talk groups again.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Let's talk security groups, especially.
We'll see how chatty the comments, the chat section is. If there's a lot of comments in here, maybe we'll consider doing a part 2.
Yeah.
But okay. I doubt it. I doubt there's that much to talk about for security groups. So there's a couple ways we could take this conversation. We could talk purely like, let's go look at the admin settings and let's talk specifically around those groups, or what security groups are used there. There's also, I think, Tommy, you kind of noted here in the group, there's actually 3 kinds of groups that you can build from Active Directory: a security group, a distribution group, and then a Microsoft O365 group. So those are kind of the groups that I'm aware of that you could build out there. And then I think there's also another area here that, again, we're talking security groups to some degree, but I think there's maybe a broader topic that I would maybe want to address is, as we look at like how many workspaces do we need to have? Is there a naming convention? Is there groups that go along with a named workspace? How many do we have? How many workspaces should an organization have? Is there a different number for the certified area of data sets? And how does that grouping work as far as your organization as you start building out more of your infrastructure across your team or teams? It could be multiple teams at that point. So anyways, where do you want to take this, Tommy? Where do you want to go for the conversation today?
I think really just explaining what actual cases are there for groups, and do you think most Power BI developers consider groups enough or utilize them in your experience? And then really what are what are the usual suspects that we should be using groups?
Good point.
Do a lot of people use them? I would say no, because it's easier to just slap users into a share to some degree, right?
Yeah.
It's probably where the topic of conversation came from, because it requires some forethought or plan to implement sharing to groups or wider audiences of people by using AD groups, right? The overall reason that I try to utilize them as much as possible, and maybe not initially, like I find myself like adding users right out of the gate, especially for like new reports as I'm iterating. And then I figure out like what that group means within the share of that report or reports.
Sure.
And then I go ask for an AD group to be created with adding all these members. But at the same time, I've done both, where it's much easier to add an AD group and know that a group of users that are coming and going within an organization are always going to be managed by IT, because like the number one reason to use them is I don't want to be IT. I don't want to manage permissions within Power BI. And if you do that on a user level, you're always going to have to do that, right? And that's one of the biggest
Yes.
reasons to use them is if you grant user access to everything, you have to maintain the users within your environment, which means you've got to stay together with HR. You got to understand when people leave the organization. You got to like, you have to remove permissions. You have to add permission. Like, it's almost like, depending on the size of the org, you're like, you'd have a person just adding permissions to how many different reports or workspaces if you don't have an AD group, which just kind of scales across things pretty easily.
I would
Anyway,
100% agree with that.
That's my high level.
I would say this strong. So there's two thoughts here. One thought is I love the idea of having security groups attached to. There's definitely 4 areas of Power BI workspaces. There's admin, member, contributor, and viewer. So in a context of a single workspace, the people that are going to be viewing or editing or contributing to that workspace, I'm becoming more. I mean, before I just kind of just threw people in there or had security groups that attach to those things. So I guess the first thought here is I like using security groups for those areas. I like having a security group, one for each of those admins, because there's likely an admin section there's an admin team that's adminning multiple workspaces, or the administration of your workspaces, depending on how central your BI team is or not. You just apply one security group, and that security group gets added at every admin level for all workspaces. Because that way, when they call you for help, you know you automatically have access. So that to me, that makes sense. The members and the contributors area, this gets a little bit more. You could have a lot more security groups being built because you're looking at a workspace that is centered around developers of Power BI. Now, this is, I think, where maybe my mindset starts to change a little bit, or has been changing as I continue to use this and work this out within organizations. If you use the app to share reports to users that are not developing stuff, makes total sense. Keep the members and the contributors small and have a security group that contains those users. But if you're expecting users or viewers of reports to just show up to a workspace and use that experience to interact with your reports, I think it gets to your point, Seth, a lot of management around bringing people in or out of that group. And I'm not necessarily always the expert of your team and the people that need to be added in your team to that particular area.
So I think 2 things. The fundamental thing for the use of groups is probably from the access of content. And you're going not a level deeper, but obviously from the roles in a workspace. But I think just from the majority of people who are going to be using Power BI, the consumers, and we're saying security groups a lot, but especially with sharing content, you have to also realize too, like distribution groups work just as well from sharing content. The first time that I found how useful that was creating reports before using Power BI apps, and was like, well, everyone on the global sales team needs this. It's like, okay, it's like, my goodness. And I was like, can you give me the list? Like, oh, it's on the distribution list, and how to go to Outlook, look at a user, then find those users. I'm like, I'm just curious one day, see if I could share that in the app, and you could, which is an amazing way, because usually distribution groups are pretty up to date, and they do serve a different purpose than security groups.
Yes.
Office 365 groups can be created by anyone, especially back in the day. You create a workspace, you create a group.
Exactly.
But like
totally.
distribution lists from a sharing point of view, like, those are going to be up to date because those are synced with who's getting the emails. And that, from where security groups, I think their role outside of Power BI, like what their real purpose is in an organization and Active Directory, distribution list or groups work phenomenally from the sharing of content. And I think that's the most fundamental thing. When you get to the roles, that's where maybe the more customization is needed.
Well,
so I don't like
good points.
There's going to be use cases. Like, there's flexibility within all this. There's going to be use cases where, you may use one group over the other, but like, speaking specifically to the groups and what they allow you to do in AD, and I'm not an admin, but on a high level, like the O365 group, which was like, create something in Power BI and it's in SharePoint, it's in Plans,
Teams,
it's right. Like, that's the universal group. It's the universal group, and the members of that group have permissions across these different tools in the ecosystem, which created a massive headache for us, obviously, because or Office 365 admins, and they hated Power BI from the get-go because it was like, what is happening to my system, especially when they managed it. That's all been fixed now, right? Distribution groups, like you're saying, if those are available, being that they're in the context of an email group, and that's going to be the same group that would receive the report, and we can share with them, great. Security groups, though, have different features of either one of those, from the standpoint that you can apply policies, you can apply license provisioning. So anybody who gets added to that group from an administration standpoint can automatically receive the benefits of, like, you don't have a pro license, now you do, right? Like that type of thing, which is why I think, from a preference point, and I don't care how the IT team wants to manage this, but I recommend, like, hey, whether it's a group that is the admin group or the member group, which are the individuals that are on the workspace, right, that are going to be modifying files and are part of my team or somebody else, et cetera. Like, my team is split into two security groups that are easily applied to every workspace that gets created. But at the same time, if end users are also in security groups, then you can have all those other things that can go along behind the scenes around licensing, et cetera, that allow you to share with those groups. And they're much more, I guess, controlled in that sense, or you can have more control with them. So I like the flexibility that you can share to different distribution, like share to different groups. But in terms of setup of the actual AD groups, I think security groups make the most sense to me.
And I do agree in terms of when you get to the modifying, editing, creating content role, where whatever that is that you're needing to apply, the security groups need to be probably the primary choice because of the customization, right? Because usually distribution groups, it's harder to control. It's usually a broader group of people. And also, that's the only thing that works in the tenant settings in Power BI. You can't do any other. Yeah.
So that's where I was going to go with on this one was, so to your point, Tommy, that's where I was thinking about some of this. If you go through the admin features, I was thinking, like, what are some of the security groups that we should have 100% made? And again, I think if your company like that, yeah, you're right. So let me finish your topic, Tommy, because I have other thoughts around this one as well. But inside the admin portal, there is very clear, I think, security groups that you need to make from the administration standpoint. And even if you're not the admin, these are things that your IT organization would want to be considerate of, and allow, or even delegating those permissions to someone else in the center of excellence or the BI team. One such thing being, can you use data marts or not? Can you try them out? There may be a team of people that are experimenting with this, and they need to have access to pull people in and out of that if they want. So I think they're 100%, Tommy. Keep going.
So everything I'm about to say has a large caveat and limitation.
Oh,
So
boy. Oh, boy.
just so we're all making a mental note, we'll put it in the parking lot.
Okay.
So the tenant level settings, data marts, ability to create a workspace, for example.
Yep. Correct.
Can be managed based on or only managed based on either the entire organization or security groups. Nothing in between. No individual users. It has to be a security group. So all the features from the admin point of view, you better have some security groups created specifically for Power BI. And I think going back to even just from a workspace roles, another cases, that's where security groups need to come in. But from the tenant level settings, you can get very customized and very detailed without having to deal with the weeds of like an individual user. And having these primary, structured or like primary defined security groups that allow Power BI to be managed a certain way. I mean, the first thing that I do in any organization is we look at the tenant level settings and look at who can create a workspace. And we make sure that is part of a security group. The data marts, for example, I usually leave that on because I like the complications there. But
were you being facetious there? Is that
no. I like everyone discovering things and having access.
Having lots of questions for you later on. What is this data mart thing?
Yeah.
How do I use this?
But,
why is it slow?
Yeah. But I mean, the ability, from everything in between from a Power BI point of view or from tenant features is from the security group point of view. So that's what I'm going to say in terms of that's the power of security groups and what you can do with it. And I'll let you kind of reply, and then I'll go with where the limitation is.
Well, I mean, and there's other couple ones that I'm thinking. I mean, I think this is something where people need to educate themselves on what's in the admin panel in general. There's documentation on what's in the admin settings. If you have the ability to be the admin and look through those things, I think that's a great place to start because there is like a handful of if your company has the ability to publish to web, if there is information that you would want to be able to publicly share, for sure that's a security group. Turn it off. Only put people in that have gone through training and understand what that means. There's other areas in here that I'm thinking through, like, inviting guest users to your tenant. That should be controlled. Who can create certified content or not? That should be controlled, right? So there's a lot of, simple security groups that I think that would, as you look at, in my mind, I'm drawing like a Venn diagram, right? There's a Venn diagram of there's central BI team that has certain access to things that they can do. And then there's other areas of the business that you potentially give them more power or more an enablement to self-manage and not have everything centralized. Like maybe you give an entire team or a department the ability to create their own workspaces. And after they've gone through some training, right? I think a lot of these things to me are gated, right? I'll give you access to these things once we align on a policy and have clear communication about what's going to happen.
Yeah, but that doesn't fit the self-service model aspect of Power BI, right?
I mean,
like the minute you put a gate on something.
Agreed. But also there has to be gates at some level. We can't have. I mean, this is what we've been like. This is what we beat up every week.
I mean, Seth.
Right
now,
there's got to be gates somewhere. I mean,
we're not saying that if you open up Power BI, I'm going to get an alert, right? But there's obviously has to be something, right?
Do you turn on data marts for your whole organization right now without kind of testing it? I mean, things are in preview. I think you would definitely want to gate those things. If your company policy wants to slow things down, and again, it's whatever your business speed can handle. I'm not sure if I'm always ready, and not every organization isn't always ready for everyone to create their own workspaces and just go to town.
Anyone can feature content for the organization.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying the ecosystem in and of itself isn't set up in that fashion. So
I agree.
Trying to put a gate on something across that is never going to be there. Because there's a huge self-service component to Power BI. Like that's where you get viral adoption.
I
Like
think
the other interesting thing
yeah.
about, like, to me, I guess, in all this is, like, it's very easy for me to be like, oh, you know, it would make a lot of sense is we should have a default admin group that we can create that any workspace gets this admin group, because then as we have to use APIs to figure out like who's the bonehead that created something that's consuming all of the capacity, and we have to go talk to them and manage them, rather than going and having to talk across those boundaries, and admin would be able to just go look at the report. Right away, though, I think about data security, right? Where does that not work? Well, that admin group who would need to have full sign off across the organization, from the C-suite to see finance data, HR data, you know, all the data in an ecosystem, and that's just not going to be the case, right? So that falls apart. But at the same, like, so I think the challenge is you have this, you know, like, I keep using the word juxtaposition, right? Like this in and out of, like, we'd like to do these things, but I can see why you wouldn't. We want to do this, but
Yes.
you know, how do you admin that? But no, you can't
Yes.
do that, right? And
Yes.
and that's where a lot of that, like, behavior, putting gates or adding defaults and running it through the org is challenging. I do like the idea, and I want to say some of them are feature enabled by security group or user, right? Aren't some users, like, there are tenant settings that allow certain users to do certain things, aren't they?
Only security groups.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
but it's permission based features and functionality,
Yeah.
right? That I can get behind.
For example, we're just to run through the mill. If you do not have admin level access and you're wondering what are we talking about, some of the things that you can manage based on the security group on who has access. Use data sets across workspaces, sensitivity labels, create workspaces, copy and paste visuals, export data, all the different formats, certification, also security group, allow email subscriptions to external users, Microsoft Teams, PowerPoint, discover content, XML endpoints, custom visuals, Azure map visuals, audit logs. All these things are managed from the tenant level settings, and each one of these can be applied either to the entire organization, which is by default, or to one or more security groups. So, and I think the idea of that to Seth, oh, you're there. Okay. I thought you froze.
My face is just frozen. I just
like a monkey in the background. But so let me ask, and I think, Mike, you already said some of this, but what is there, like, a minimum level of, let's say, knowledge, or I don't want to say skill, but a minimum knowledge area that a Power BI developer or admin who has access to either, you know, their publishing content, or their tenant level admin for Power BI, that they should know about security groups? And basically on top of that, like, where should they always be used, security groups?
I think this is a good question, because I feel like this is a scale. I feel like we're scaling things one direction or the other, right? So you can go to the super controlled level where you security group everything. And then the security groups become a nightmare to manage because there's too many of them. And I'm thinking of the use case, and this is what I was talking to earlier. Let's imagine you have 3 workspaces, dev, test, prod, in the deployment pipeline area. Each of those workspaces could have 4 security groups: admin, member, contributor, viewer. So now you're talking 3 times 4, which I'm hoping you can do math, 12 security groups just for that single pipeline of whatever that thing is. So there's a potential for lots of security groups to be created very quickly to be able to manage or administer all the different users who need to be participating in that pipeline. Maybe there's a little bit of overlap where you're not needing a single security group for every single one of those. But as I think about that scenario, where, like, my mind goes to, when is the right time to use those kind of things? Do I just add users for now? And then later on, if it becomes more of a production or a certified data set, do we then govern it by security groups? Is that how we want to handle it? For sure, there's probably, like, I don't know, 10 or 15 security groups that you need to be created just to administer the admin settings. There's probably more. I haven't really done the numbers on them exactly, but, like, I think, you know, Tommy, to answer your question directly, right? Where do you definitely use security groups? 100% you use them in the admin settings. There's security groups that are created there that turn things on or off. Seth, I thought you brought up a really great point earlier about licensing and being able to apply users to a licensed group that then automatically provides them a pro license. Those users get access instantly to what they need to from that level. There's potentially the option to have like a pro license and a workspace creation license, security group. So these are the people that we go through training. They understand what's going on, and then you've been able to provide them access to be able to create and develop their own new things. So that way you're not totally blocking self-service. Because again, I think we're playing the game here. By over controlling things, you're squelching the self-service portion of this. And I'd agree. I don't want to. Again, I'm becoming more IT focused in my old age. Like, I guess that's how it works. Seth, as you mature, you become more controlled.
No, well, I think there's a balance. I think it comes
Right?
off as controlling or whatnot, but what you're trying to do is say, hey, we're going to create a policy or a rule, and it's a broad swath. Like, we're trying to solve more than just one problem, whereas the vast majority of business or people in general within a business are solving their problem. It's the one thing, right? And the minute you start to branch out from that, it definitely falls into enterprise conversations, right? I want to solve a problem across the organization. And ultimately, you can only do that sometimes when a policy or process changes or you implement one, right?
Yes. Yeah,
and
exactly.
That's where there's always going to be the shift. And I think that's where
Correct.
even within this ecosystem, we have a lot of conversation points because you have the Wild West. You have the people that are using Power BI just for themselves or just for their team. And then you have groups like BI teams, et cetera, that we talk about that are, focusing more on the enterprise side of things, right? We want to manage things. We want to administer, make sure the environment that you're working in is working as we would all expect, or that you're going to start paying for a larger portion of it because you're utilizing it more, or whatever the case may be. Like, these are all parts of the conversation that have to happen.
And here lies the limitations and problems with everything we're talking about. None of us have the ability to manage the security groups, the members, and how many we create. Just like we talked about how much control. Do you?
I do.
No,
I mean, obviously I do.
What do you mean by that, though? What do you mean by that? Like, on a day-to-day basis? Of course not.
Right. And a lot of times too with IT, trying to, especially if it's a little more dynamic, or if we're dealing with what we talked about, we want to be very customized, where we have not just Power BI admins and Power BI developers, where you have all these different things in between. One that has to be managed somewhere, and that's not usually in an interface or a browser that the Power BI developer is going to have. That's going to be controlled by the IT office,
100%.
right?
Yeah.
So, and two, you may not get the best acceptance too for all the security groups that you want to create and that management that they're updated in real time, or not really real time, but on a timely basis. So relying on IT for that management for new groups that you need to create, how long that needs to take, that I think is a major limitation with security groups, because we can't manage those groups ourselves and the members. We can request it. We can request more groups being created.
Yeah,
but
I think
right.
But to fit back into the governance, or like the leadership part of this, right? I would 100% agree. If you're ad hoc requesting that a bunch of security groups get built and IT has no idea why or what you're trying to do, yeah, you're probably going to meet a lot of resistance, right? Like, if we're talking though between these groups, you have to set a standard and a process so that your internal processes, like IT support knows what's coming in and how to handle something. Hey, I'm requesting this Power BI group to be created. Here's the members, and they look in their lexicon of like, okay, how do I? And it's like, create an 80 group. Here's the reason. Here's the method. Here's what they're doing. Blah 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 blah. Like, that's a pre-conversation, Tommy. Right? Like, to me, if we're talking about, listen, we need some initial. This is a conversation with IT. I need groups for managing admin settings, right, in Power BI, and
Correct.
You guys can be admins.
I think you start there. Yep.
We need our security groups for builders, right? There's going to be admins and members or whatever, and contributors. It can mimic the same thing that you would have within a workspace itself, but then you're not managing every single user and everything that is a governed entity, meaning like your BI team and workspace that are being created. And then the larger group one, I think, where this conversation comes in is the sharing, right? What are the groups within the organization that you might automatically create, but at the same time all follow the same pattern, right? And what I mean by that is, if sales is the organization, maybe it's everybody who is in that area of the business is a member of that group. And then maybe you have to split it out and you have a leadership sales and then you have a team sales, or, like leadership doesn't care about 80% of the reports that are out there, or they do, or maybe it's only 2 groups, all and leadership, because by audience, you'd probably want to split out which are the security groups that make the most sense. And then that becomes a process, right? Next time you're requesting, oh, hey, we need this new group. We didn't have one for marketing. We need a leadership one. We're building a report for that. It just becomes part of the stack of support that IT handles, as opposed to them doing their due diligence every single time a BI developer is saying, hey, I need a new security group. And they're like, why? Like, what permissions are you giving?
Yes.
Why
correct.
why are you doing this? What are they going to get access to? Like, they have to ask those questions. Right. But that's where I say 100% the due diligence has to be done up front when you're doing this, because you want them to manage the users, right? You're offloading responsibility of that in here to say, yeah, you guys manage whether or not somebody has access to our systems. It behooves them to do this.
Correct.
Right? They
Yes.
want to be the ones that control access to systems. And you're saying, here's what we need from you in order for that to happen.
I like that.
Otherwise, what's going to happen is I'm going to add these users in these environments, and I'm not going to clean them up, or they're not going to get cleaned up for like 3 months or whatever. So that if you don't turn them off, that could potentially leave a gap in security within the organization. And they're going to be like, you know what? We should create AD groups for you.
And I think to your point there's going to be some common patterns where you're going to need to request or create groups, and even this is, I mean, you can, if you need to, you can delegate the creation of security groups to a person. So if there is a central enough person or someone who, again, this is maybe more of like a training thing potentially, where IT could offload this work to somebody else to be able to provide. I mean, the security group is just a group of people. Applying that group to things, that's when the security is actually granted. So
right. So you are applying that permission,
correct.
Right?
Correct.
You're
Yes.
not applying like who's in the group though, or you're managing that with IT.
Correct.
But at the same, so there is power there, but at the same time, it's the addition and subtraction that would just is the overhead and headache, where like I see these highly used in our workspaces that are like the highly curated ones, the ones we talk about at the top of the pyramid all the time, right? These are the ones that are these are widely shared.
Yes.
They're across organizational units. Like, this is the big deal stuff, which is why as we go down the pyramid of like into the self-service area, it's like, well, I don't really see like that everybody is going to be using these, nor do we really want them to, right? Like,
it's interesting. Yeah.
So Adam actually mentions in the chat window, which I think is very interesting. He works at Microsoft, and so Adam says he has the ability to create security groups. And again, I think if people know what they're doing, again, this is where I feel like if a little bit of education and training on that front side of things. And I've even seen recently Microsoft is even changing how they administer users and groups and let people create stuff. So I think Microsoft, to some degree, wants you to be able to create these security groups because they make everything easier to manage. The creation of the security group is not providing access. That is just a person who's able to administer and collect people together, and then that collection of people can then be applied where they need to be applied. The permissioning really occurs when you take that security group and apply it as, okay, this is the security group. I'm going to make an admin on this workspace. That's when those things are applied. I think it really helps to like let that control portion of creating security groups relinquish that more to key individuals across the organization. The central BA team should be able to do that. They should be able to make their own security groups and apply.
I'm not, yeah,
who's the administrator of those.
I'm not arguing that it would be if you have the knowledge of how to do that.
Yeah.
That would be extremely helpful, right? To just have certain admin level people in groups have that ability. I just know that like the vast majority of people that are listening to us or in BI teams won't have that ability.
That's true. That's very true.
Yeah.
And I think it also changes between smaller and larger companies too, right? I mean,
probably. Microsoft's just a little big.
Just a little big.
Little
big company. But as the company size grows, right? I mean, this could be full-time jobs for just one or multiple people at that point. And then I mean, someone else was commenting in the chat window. I don't remember the name. It scrolled past now, but they have like full automation scripts around how to administer and manage groups as like automation. And I think that's another great idea too, right? If you could have automation around that, or cleaning, and I'll put this out too, because I've worked with Dan Meisner about this one. I mean, in some organizations, people leave. And when people leave, you get all kinds of residual data from them being attached to things that they had access, they don't now. And so now you have like in your logging or auditing of Power BI assets, if those users no longer exist, it says it's like, I don't remember what it's called. It's not an unidentified user, but there's some kind of term. And Dan, if you're on the call, help me out there. But there's some kind of like terminology used for those users that have been removed from your Active Directory, but that are their GUID, their ID is still attached to some assets. So sometimes you have to go back through and clean up those things. That's where automation and scripting, I think, would also make sense as well.
Or orphaned user?
Orphaned user, maybe that's what we're talking about.
I'm going to put this link or article in the description, but it's his name is datahelge.com, which I'm going to say because I'm terrible at names, but he uses Data Factory to manage groups and for row level security and app audiences.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So that's like another automation. You would send something in, it would kick off a pipeline, it would hit a series of API calls, do something, and then turn off.
Yeah, and it'll set access permissions for Databricks. Yeah. So, and I think we're getting more to that point where there's so many features in Power BI tenant settings, and then we're talking about app audiences. I mean, we haven't even talked about using security groups the way Kurt did. We're using security groups as a feature, not in a sense, a restriction.
That's true.
So there are a lot of maybe that is part two, like the creative use cases of using groups. But and I think that I would say that a minimum level for any developer, and this would be part of the interview checklist, the way they share. If they're sharing everything individually, it's like, is this for sales? Yeah. So the sales at distribution group, and if they don't, like, that needs to be at least known that option is available. Maybe their organization doesn't have everything set up the right way, but I mean, that has to be known by the Power BI developer from a deployment point of view.
I think there's what I would call maybe more like a maturity lens to some of this. And like, as you're maturing in these pieces, I think one of the mature pieces would be, okay, you're initially you may be adding people to things. Eventually you're starting to migrate away from that. You're starting to, provide training. You're doing more automation around that. You're having forms. Like if you need to request a workspace, you build a process as, hey, we're going to request this workspace. We're going to, in that process of the workspace, we're going to create these security groups. And I think one thing that's underrated here is providing an adequate naming convention. So I think there's potentially a naming convention here that if you're talking about security groups that are workspace based, you add, some abbreviations inside those security groups. If it's related to Power BI, maybe you add a little term, PBI at the beginning of that security group. So it's a Power BI related security group or security groups related to things around Power BI. So I do think a cleaner naming convention kind of speaks to that, being able to govern things. And so as you mature your organization, you're going to probably use more security groups and delegate those permissions to people to manage them individually.
And Seth, I think you already said a lot of a question I was going to ask, which I think is a huge part. But for those who are listening that are not necessarily familiar with it or haven't started, like, where do you start, or where's the getting started on implementing security groups? And I think the biggest thing you said is having a conversation with IT.
I agree.
But what else would you do kind of to get the ball rolling to getting this started in your organization?
I mean, the get the ball rolling, I think, or the use case behind this conversation is, as you're thinking about how workspaces are created and content is being shared in your organization, take into account like how you would want to share them via groups, right? Like the more you utilize a feature that allows you to share to a wider audience that you don't have to manage, but represents the audience that you want to share the report to, the better off you're going to be, right? So just make that part of the conversation, or like lay that out in your architecture and how you want to like build things or set standards, and try to adhere to that. And you're going to iterate, right? Like you might find a derivation or something that's not going to work with the scenarios that you're thinking about, but at least have it in as part of your conversation, as opposed to so-and-so is asking for this report, I'm just going to share it with them. And then when it's in production, they're going to ask me to add 20 people, right? Like understand what does the audience mean in the context of who are you going to share with, and how does that fit into your wider understanding of how you would segment out large swaths of people within an org. And I think that's a great first step.
I agree.
And then once you have that, those help facilitate the conversation with, if it's a different team, or how you would structure, creation of that within AD from a starting point.
And I think this is also another part too. I like your note there, Seth. I think it's engaging the security team, having that conversation, because there may be already policies in place that are helping you. Like you can just jump onto an existing policy,
reuse things that already exist.
Exactly. Yeah. Maybe you're reusing some things that are already there. So I think that's a very key point to start with that. And then also, I think it's knowing what, again, being comfortable going through admin portal, working with IT, and having them show you what's in there, and helping them understand what security groups are needed to administer. And again, automate and delegate, right? As much as you can, figure out how to provide ownership of these various things to other people in the organization. So that way there isn't always a bottleneck. Because if you request a security group and it takes a week to get it done, it just slows production down. Like that's silly. This is the whole reason we have Power BI, is to go fast, right? What purpose is that serving us? So anyways. Well, I think we've done it. We've burned through a perfectly good hour of your time. I hope this security groups has severely confused you, and make you think a lot about more things around security groups. We appreciate all your listenership. We just got a summary back from our Anchor podcasting platform. We're crushing it inside the business intelligence, or the business area around podcasting. So that's not us, that's all of you guys. So thank you all so much for participating. Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. We really appreciate it. I hope you get some good things to think about today. We appreciate you joining us. And our only request is, if you wouldn't mind, share this with somebody else. If you find this is adding value to you, if you feel like this is helping you think through Power BI things, please share it with somebody else, either through social media. You can definitely snippet Seth talking about slapping his users or something like that. I think that what happened earlier in the podcast. It'll be super fun, and you can enjoy the podcast. So thank you all very much for listening. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
Yeah, there are some numbers or some data points that Anchor said. I'm like, I need to see the back end of this. I don't know where they're getting this.
I don't trust this data.
Yeah, I was like, come on. But yeah, if you really enjoy this, like I said, if you're listening, make sure to subscribe, share the word. Your community, your feedback, you guys listening is really why we're here. Join the conversation live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central. We got a mailbag, suggest a topic.
Yes,
we
please.
love hearing from you guys. And if you really enjoy it, the least you can, or the most you can do, is spread the word, share it,
please.
Tell people what you think.
We really appreciate
it. Where can you find it, Tommy?
YouTube, Spotify,
outside
Apple.
of YouTube. There you go.
And a podcast. It's a podcast. So
it's a podcast. All of the podcast channels.
Yes,
it's a podcast.
You had such a cadence of all of them. I love that. You got to finish on that.
I know. It's like my happy Tuesday.
We took a long break. We haven't done this in a week.
We're a little rough.
We're a little rough around the edges here.
We'll dial it back in, folks.
Thank you all very much, and we'll see you next time.